Great news. Great news. I went to the other side of this island that I landed on, and there's a resort. There's a resort. You can see it behind me this way. And I had a dry credit card, so I'm in. I'm in. I'm going to stay at the resort for a while, and this will be, if I have to go back and forth, but I'll be fine. Okay, there's boats here, helicopter if I have to, but I think it's great. I think it was very lucky that I found this. Got a shower, washed my clothes, all those things I needed to do. Okay, so we're going to do two chapters today. This is chapter 8 and 9 um, of the Cay, and we found out maybe he's in the devil's mouth, and that would be a really bad thing. Okay, so let's get going on chapter 8. During the afternoon, Timothy was busy, and we did not talk much. He was making a hut of dried palm fronds. I sat near him under a palm. Now that we were on shore, I began to think about what had happened to my mother. Somehow, I felt she was safe. I was also sure that a search had been started for us, not fully understanding that a war was on and that all ships and aircraft were needed to fight the U-boats. I even thought about Heinrich van Boven and what a story I would have to tell when I saw him again. I tried not to think about my eyes sitting there under the palm, listening to Timothy hum as he made the camp. I trusted him that my sight would return within a few days. I also trusted him that an aircraft would spot our fire pile. In late afternoon, he said proudly, "Look at our hut." I had to remind him again, stupid old man, that I couldn't see. So he took my hands and ran them over the fronds. It was a hut, he said, about 8 feet wide and 6 feet deep, with supports made of wood he'd picked off the beach. The supports were tied together with strong vines that covered the north end of the island. The roof, which sloped back, he said, was about 6 feet off the ground. I could easily stand up in it, but Timothy couldn't, not quite. Timothy said, "Tomorrow we be getting mats to sleep on. We've our own, but tonight we must sleep on the sand. 'Tis soft." I knew he was very proud of the hut. It had taken him only a few hours to build it. "Now," he said, "I must go down to the reef and fetch langosta. We'll roast it to be true." I became frightened again the minute he said it. I didn't want to be left alone, and I was afraid something might happen to him. "Take me with you, Timothy," I pleaded. "Not on the reef," he answered firmly. "I have not been there before. If 'tis safe tomorrow, I will take you with. I will take you." With that, he went down the hill without saying another word. My mother was right, I thought. They had their place and we had ours. He did not really like me, or he would have taken me along. He was different. It seemed as though he was gone for a very long time. Once I thought I heard an aircraft, but it was probably just my imagination. I began yelling for Timothy to come back, but I guess he couldn't hear because the water noise on the reef. The palm fronds above me rattled in the breeze, and there were other noises from the underbrush. I knew Stu Cat was around somewhere, but it didn't sound like him. I wondered if Timothy had checked for snakes. There were also scorpions on most Caribbean islands, and they were deadly. I wondered if there were any on our Cay. During those first few days on the island, the times I spent alone were terrible. It was, of course, being unable to see that made all the sounds so frightening. I guess if you are born blind, it's not so bad. You grow up knowing each sound and what it means. Suddenly, the tears came out. I knew it was not a manly thing to do, something my father would have frowned on, but I couldn't stop. Then from nowhere came Stu Cat. He rubbed along my arms and up against my cheek, purring hard. I held him close. Soon Timothy came up the hill shouting, "Young boss, tree nice langosta." I refused to speak to him because he had left me for such a long time. He stood over me and said, "Here, touch them. They are still alive." He was almost crowing over his lobster. I turned away. Sooner or later, Timothy would have to understand that he could not ignore me one minute and treat me as a friend the next. He said softly, "Young boss, be an outrageous man if you like, but here, I'm all you got." I didn't answer. He roasted the langosta over the fire, and later we crawled into the hut to spend our first night on the silent island. Timothy seemed very tired and groaned a lot. Before we went to sleep, I asked him, "Tell me the truth, Timothy. How old are you?" He sighed deeply. "More than 70, even more than 70. He was very old enough to die there. In the morning, Timothy began making the fire pile down on the beach. He had a plan. We'd always keep a small fire smoldering up by the hut, and if an airplane came near, he'd take a piece of burning wood from our small fire to ignite the big one. That way, he said, we could save the few matches that we had. So they have a large fire pile at the bottom near the beach, and then they have a small fire that they just keep burning right by the camp. And their camp is on the highest part of the island because the island kind of shaped like a melon. You remember that? And it's on the top. And so they would take a piece of wood and with a fire on it, and keep, so that way they save their matches, run down to the beach and light the big signal fire with all the dry stuff. Okay. It didn't take him long to stack driftwood over dried palm fronds. Then he said, "Now, young boss, we must say something on the sand." Sometimes it was difficult to understand Timothy. The soft and beautiful West Indian accent, the way of speaking weren't always clear. "Say something on the sand?" I asked. "So there be no one we'd be down here," he explained patiently. "Who?" "The man in the sky, of course." Oh, now I understood. I guess Timothy was standing there looking at me, waiting for me to say something or do something. I heard him say, "Well, young boss." "What do we do now?" I asked. His voice was now impatient. He said, "Say something with the rock, with the many rocks. Every rock be saying something." I frowned at him. "I don't think I can help you, Timothy. I can't see any rocks." Timothy groaned. "I can see the rock, young boss. What do we say?" I laughed at him, enjoying it now. "We say help." He grunted satisfaction. For the next 20 or 30 minutes, I could hear Timothy dropping rocks against each other, singing softly to himself in calypso. It was a song about fungi and fish. I had fungi in Willemstad, down in the Blacks Market at Ruttercade. It was just plain old cornmeal, but most food has different names in the islands. Soon he came to stand over me. "Now, young boss," he said. He seemed to be waiting. "Yes?" There was a silence until Timothy broke it with anguish. "With the rock, say help." I looked up in his direction and suddenly understood that Timothy could not spell. He was just too stubborn or too proud to admit it. I nodded and began feeling around the sand for a stick. He asked, "What are you reaching for?" "A stick to make lines with." He placed one in my hands, and I carefully lettered HELP on the sand while he stood above me watching. He kept murmuring, uh-huh, as if making sure I was spelling it correctly. When he had finished, Timothy said approvingly, "I tell you, young boss, that do say help." Then he happily arranged the rocks on the sand following my lines. I felt good. I knew how to do something that Timothy couldn't do. He couldn't spell. I felt superior to Timothy that day, but I let him play his little game, pretending not to know that he really couldn't spell. Now, do we judge Timothy on that and say, "Oh yeah, he couldn't spell, he must be not smart"? Well, or do you understand what Timothy's life must have been like? Timothy probably never went to school. He grew up, was born, and then he didn't know his parents. And then, that Hannah Gums lady took care of him. And he's been working since he was a little guy, like 7, 8, 9 years old, just working. And probably when he was around 10 or 11, Philip's age, he had to go work on schooners and fishing boats and different boats like that. So There never any school for him. So no, he's certainly not dumb. Chapter 9, we're going to do this one too because it's real short. In the afternoon, Timothy said we'd make a rope. On the north end of the island, tough vines, almost as large as a pencil, were laced over the sand. It took us several hours to tear out a big pile of them. Then Timothy began weaving a rope that would stretch all the way down the hill to the beach and fire pile. The rope was for me. If he happened to be out on the reef and I heard a plane, I could take a light from our campfire, follow the rope down, and touch off the big fire. The vine rope would also serve to get me safely down to the beach. After we'd torn the vines out and he was weaving the rope, he said, "Young boss, you must begin to help with the other work." Help with the work, all the other work. We were sitting up by the hut. I had my back to a palm and was thinking that back in Willemstad at this moment, I'd probably be sitting in a classroom 3 desks away from Heinrich, listening to Herr Jonkier talk about European history. I'd been tutored in Dutch the first year in Willemstad, so I could attend the regular school. Now I could speak it and understand it. My hands were tired from pulling the vines, and I just wanted to sit and think. I didn't want to work. I said, "Timothy, I'm blind. I can't see to work." I heard him cutting something with his sharp knife. He replied softly, "The hand is not blind," meaning his hand. Your hand is not blind. Didn't the old man understand? To work aside from pulling up vines or drawing something in the sand, you must be able to see. Stubbornly, he said, "Young boss, we need sleeping mats. You can make the mats." I looked over in his direction. "You do it," I said. He sighed back, saying, "The best mat maker in Charlotte Amalie, down in Frenchtown, be total blind." But he's a man, and he has to do that to make a living. "Be true," Timothy said quietly. But in a few minutes, he placed several lengths of palm fiber across my lap. He really was a black mule. "The palm mat is very easy, just over and under." Becoming angry with him, I said, "I tell you, I can't see." He paid no attention to me. "Take this hand, hold the palm like this, then over and under like the man in Frenchtown, then more palm." I could feel him standing there watching me as I tried to reeve the links, but I knew they weren't fitting together. He said, "Like this, I tell you." And he reached down to guide my hand, over and under. I tried again, but it didn't work. I stood up, threw the palm fibers at him and screamed, "You ugly black man, I won't do it. You're stupid. You can't even spell." Timothy's heavy hand struck my face sharply. Stunned, I touched my face where he'd hit me. Then I turned away from where I thought he was. My cheek stung, but I wouldn't let him see me with tears in my eyes. I heard him saying very gently, "Be getting back to work my own self." I sat down. He began to sing that fungi and fish song in a low voice, and I could picture him sitting on the sand in front of the hut, that tangled gray hair, the ugly black face with thick lips, those great horny hands winding the strands of vine. The rope, I thought. It wasn't for him. It was for me. After a while, I said, "Timothy?" He did not answer, but walked over to me, pressing more palm fibers into my hands. He murmured, "'Tis very easy, over and under." Then he went back to singing about fungi and fish. Something happened to me that day on the Cay. I'm not quite sure what it was even now, but I had begun to change. I said to Timothy, "I want to be your friend." He said softly, "Young boss, you have always been my friend." I said, "Can you call me Philip instead of young boss?" "Philip," he said warmly. Okay, so that chapter is always kind of confusing for kids. We talk about why, it's not, I don't believe it's all ever good to strike a child. But in this case, I always ask the kids, why do you think Timothy hit Philip and slapped him? And a lot of kids always answer, well, because he called him a name. It isn't that. It isn't that he called him a name. It had something to do with something. Timothy doesn't care if someone calls him a name. He's not going to hit a kid because he calls him a name. Timothy knows that Philip will die on this island. And if he doesn't train Philip to survive, then Philip can't make it. So that was a wake-up call. That was I'd rather slap you now and hurt your feelings and hurt your face and get you upset than to allow you to grow up or grow here or live here on this island and not survive and die. So it's very, very different. I want you to think about it. Never appropriate to hit a child. However, in this case, it is life or death. And Timothy did what he thought was best to wake him up and say, you've got to learn how to survive. You can't sit there and rely on me. And because remember, Timothy is very, very old. So Timothy's doing all that he can to keep Philip alive. The rope, all the stuff he's doing is to keep Philip alive. And Philip kind of just realized that too. So he has changed. Then the question for you is, what is going to cause you to change? In fourth grade, did you do your work? In fifth grade, did you do your work? Did you try hard? Did you do your best? At some point, you're going to have to wake up. And the sooner you wake up and do your work and learn and be the best person you can be, the better for you. Okay? So a very powerful 2 chapters, especially that last one. We'll talk about it and think about it in the future chapters to see what it all means. He said he doesn't even realize how he changed, but he knows he changed. He realized something very, very important. Okay. Well, with that, we will meet again. I'm going to go back to my my room back there at the resort. I'm going to probably take a swim, and who knows what else. So anyway, I will see you guys tomorrow. Have a wonderful day. Okay, guys, take care. Bye-bye.